Yanis, thank you so much for joining us here at FundForum International.
It's a pleasure.
Some brilliant insights from you on stage today. Can you give me an impression of what your take is on the general global economic outlook at the moment, if you like?
We have a major imbalance between savings and investment. We have the highest savings ratio in the history of capitalism, effectively, globally, and the lowest level of investment. You only have to state that to realize what the source of our troubles are.
So where is there room for optimism in an outlook like that? And what do we need to do? Where will we get the best benefits out of this landscape, if you like?
Well, the optimism comes from the fact that this is not the first time we had such a problem. It happened after the Great Depression, and we fixed it. And we fixed it in a variety of ways. In 1944 with the Bretton Woods Conference, that was the whole point of the Bretton Woods Conference, of how to equilibrate the demand and supply of money, and how to do it in a way that provided stability globally with fixed exchange rates, or exchange rates that were not very volatile, and with the highest growth we've had, lowest inflation, lowest unemployment, and shrinking inequality. Remember the golden age of capitalism in the 1950s and 60s. Then Bretton Woods went pear-shaped, and then we found another way of dealing with it. And then another one. We can deal with it, except that since 2008 we have not been dealing with it. We are in denial. That is our problem. This is a political failure.
So if we're going to open our eyes, if we are in denial, what do we need to see?
We need to see that the markets are not going to sort out themselves, at least the money markets and the labor markets. All other markets look after themselves pretty well. But labor and money are special markets, and they require political coordination at the global level. The G20 should get their act together.
So you talked about coordination. Just go into that a bit further for me. Do you mean a sort of a collaborative approach, if you like?
Yes, collaborative approach regarding a number of things. Firstly, trade, of course, but you don't need me to tell you that. But not just trade. Capital flows. Capital flows must be checked. They must be managed. There have to be capital controls of some sort. There has to be unified, coordinated regulation of banking and finance. There has to be, and this is what we're really missing, a coordinated aggregate investment strategy. How to convert all these idle savings into investments into the things the planet and humanity need.
How likely is that to happen in a world where we're seeing more and more countries sort of adopting a more protectionist approach, if you like?
Well, let's not ask that question. It's a toxic question. It's a negative question. Let's concentrate on what we must do and find the resolve to do it.
So what do we do? How do we persuade all these powers that they need to come together and do that?
Well, we're doing it now. We need a lot more of that. We need a lot more coordinated pressure at the political level on the powers that be to do the right thing. We need to change the terms of the discussion. We must stop discussing personalities, stop indulging in character assassination, stop looking at the symptoms and attack the causes. And unfortunately, this is the price of democracy. We need to have an engaged demos, an engaged people. So we need to reinvigorate politics. The idea that we've had in the 1990s and 2000s that technocracy and market mechanisms are going to replace democracy was a very problematic one.
So, using your huge knowledge of what's gone on in the past, what do you see as happening in the future economically, and what do you see as a realistic landscape ahead of us now for investors to work in?
Well, investors individually do that which they consider to be optimal for themselves. But the problem is that when we lack the political coordination, let me put it more bluntly, a political process for recycling surpluses from where they are produced to where there are deficits. This is how the United States operates. This is what the military-industrial complex does. It builds an aeroplane in Missouri so that California and New York can maintain their surplus position. This is what West Germany does vis-a-vis Germany. We need a lot more of that at the global level. The United States was playing that role in Bretton Woods, intentionally. We need to go back to that. But for that, we need leadership in Europe and in the United States, the two parts of the world that are not showing any leadership at the moment.
So what would you like to see them doing now? Because obviously we've just had a UK general election, there's a German one coming up. What do you see as a unifying sort of approach now, if you like?
Well, I would like to see politicians in Germany, in France, in the United States, it's a bit of an ask, in Britain, everywhere, join China and orchestrating a coordinated approach for investing into the things that we need, into green energy, into commodities that are good for us, into education, into health, into social security, all those things that make for a better life globally. It can be done. We need a new Bretton Woods, not to copy what Bretton Woods did in 1944, but one that looks simultaneously at the problems of money, of investment, and of finance.
What's your view on what's happening in the UK at the moment and what's going to happen next? Because obviously Brexit is very divisive, the election was extraordinary. What's going to happen next for the UK and its relationship with Europe?
Well, it hasn't been looking good since the June 2016 referendum. I'm a great critic of the EU, but I thought that the Brexiteering narrative was dismal both for Britain and for you. But I believe, remarkably, that this hung parliament is the best thing that could have happened to Britain and to Europe, because it gives Theresa May an opportunity to reverse, to go back on her hard Brexit approach, and to go for the only solution that can actually be conducive to good developments both in Britain and in the European Union. That is a Norway-style arrangement for 5 or 6 years, for the term of the next Parliament, which allows Britain to get out of the European Union, as is the want of the British people with Brexit, the Brexit referendum, while at the same time maintaining maximum continuity for the purposes of giving certainty to business, to citizens, to migrants, to people who live in the United Kingdom already, to Brits who live in Europe, and allow the next Parliament a full term during which to debate what sort of future it wants in the sense of an arrangement between the EU and the UK.
It's interesting because you raised the fact that with Brexit it was a binary decision, yes or no. There wasn't how is Brexit going to look decision for the general public, and actually what the public wanted was the House of Parliament to be given back their power, and you argued actually that is what's now happened, and with a hung Parliament perhaps it's a more moderate power that can go forward and make those negotiations in a better way for the general public in the UK.
But you see, the interim Norway-style agreement is essential to give the House of Commons sovereignty. Because if you don't have this kind of interim agreement, the House of Commons is effectively a passive bystander in a dynamic process that is quite awful, with these non-negotiations between Mr. Davis and Theresa May on the one hand and Barnier and Juncker on the other. This is not going to be negotiations, this is just two monologues of the deaf, crisscrossing each other, never meeting in the middle. And what can the House of Commons do now if this simply leads in a year from now, a year and a half from now, to a hard Brexit? Whereas if you have a period of 5 years of stability with a Norway-style agreement, the House of Commons will have the space and the time and the calmness during which to debate and therefore regain sovereignty in the affairs of the state.
So that's the UK. What about the US and Mr. Trump? What on earth's going to happen there in the next 3 years?
Well, my dilemma, the great question that I'm trying to answer is, what is best for Mr. Trump not to succeed in implementing any of his policies, or to succeed in, I'm not sure which is worse. If he succeeds in implementing his policies, the infrastructural expenditure, the huge tax cuts, which will, I'm all in favor of infrastructural expenditure, but when it's combined with large tax cuts for people like himself, that means one thing: a financial crisis, a fiscal crisis in a year and a half from now. And if, at the same time, he's squeezing the Chinese with this rhetoric about the importance of revaluing the already overvalued yuan and tariffs and all that, he's going to be forcing the Chinese to be selling US treasuries at the time when the issuance of US treasuries because of the ballooning deficit of the federal government is going to be going up. This is a recipe for a fiscal crisis in the United States in a year from now. And what will Trump do when that happens? If this happens, he will slam on the brakes. He's going to go Austerian. That's the worst outcome for the United States and for the world. So this is a disaster that may happen if he implements his policies. If he doesn't implement his policies, what exactly is he going to implement? Maybe having no government in the United States, having Congress simply passing none of the Trump laws, maybe that's the best outcome. But this is a very sad day when what we're hoping for is paralysis in Washington, D.C.
For 4 years,
Yes.
potentially. So that's the global economic outlook. It's quite depressing. Can you give me a positive to end on and where we can see some hope for the future, if you like?
Yes, I think the hope comes from the emerging markets. It comes from China. Despite the gross authoritarianism of the Chinese Communist Party under the regime, from the economic point of view, what I see is people who actually understand how capitalism works. It's funny that you have to be a communist to understand how capitalism works. And they have been very sensible in the way that they've been handling themselves since 2008.
A leading economist yesterday described Mexico as a place to look for the next emerging market as well, despite everything that's happened with the
Well,
United
I'm not
States.
in the business of picking emerging markets. What I'm saying is that emerging markets as a whole seem to have produced a political class that is far more sophisticated than anything that Europe or America has produced. So if America and Europe can get their act together, I think that wonderful times can be ahead.
A positive note to end on. Thank you, Yanis. Thanks for your thoughts.
Thank you.